Is PLG that different from a sales-led motion? We are someone that knows both.
It's completely self-onboarding. It's look ma, no hands. Just customers just come in and they put in their credit card and they invite their coworkers and they expand to juicy ACVs. And we did try to reach out. They didn't need any help, so we haven't really talked to them. And they are, now at this wonderful spot, and they're, everything's fantastic. And CAC was basically zero.
That's Ulrik Bo Larsen. He built Falcon.io into a 100 million ARR company using outbound sales. And now he's president at Pitch, a team that relies on PLG.
What's then pretty eerie is that if you had somebody that was completely self-onboarded without you talking to them, without you necessarily being able to reach them, these guys will also completely self-offboard without necessarily feeling a need to give you any signal of why they're suddenly doing that.
Today's episode is brought to you by Everstage, the top-rated platform to automate sales commissions. You can create a single hub for your reps to track all their deals, earnings, and performance history, thanks to Everstage's seamless integration with Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics, Slack, and MS Teams. Reps can also know exactly how much they could earn with Crystal, Everstage's one-of-a-kind commission forecasting module. Visit everstage.com to learn more and help your sales teams ace 2025. And now, enjoy the show.
There's no story/master plan with the hair. It just kind of happened.
So you have kids also, I believe, but I don't know, do you have 2 kids, and how many do you have?
I have 2 kids, yeah. A son turns 10 soon, and then I have our daughter at 3 years old. So it's a busy household. One of the reasons why I sit down here in this particular room is that it has an acoustically sealed door that I can lock, which is incredibly useful in the afternoon when you work from home. Yeah.
So you go in there and just scream every now and then.
And that too. No, I think more importantly, I cannot hear the screaming on the outside while I'm doing my afternoon work. That's just as useful.
No, I get that. I have like no door at all. So I get all of it when the kids are home and I'm trying to work. So I don't know if
So you end up not working, Mikkel. That's
pretty much it. I'm just clicking around. I don't know if you've seen that dog emoji that sits with a cup of coffee and there's just fire everywhere. That's like pretty much me trying to work from home. Yeah. I think that's an apt kind of picture.
I've seen a sales rep demo an app with that photo. And that was an interesting sign. So I know that photo well.
So what we wanted to chat about today with dear Ulrik is talking a little bit about some of the surprises/learnings stepping into a PLG role, right? Yes. But before we jump there, because I think that's really part of the interesting bit here is, Ulrik, can you maybe talk a little bit about what you did before you joined Pitch, where you're currently working? Kind of what was it you did before, and did you interact with PLG before, or was it maybe something else? Kind of give us a little bit of the background there, so we kind of understand the contrast later on.
Right. Yes, there's a potentially very long story. I'll try to keep it short, but I'm a self-taught software engineer turned entrepreneur turned SaaS executive, you could say. So wrote the first lines of code in a social media SaaS app that you guys know well, and basically became sort of a full stack founder and exec scaling that business. What we realized on that journey, which started in 10 all the way to the exit at 19, was that we probably needed to have a sales team to sell this. We had a lot of traction locally domestically here in Denmark, but it was clear that there was a huge opportunity. And at the time, for a lot of different reasons, it was pretty clear that one of the ways to scale that was probably to build out a sales team, which I had personally not done before. So had I think a happenstance, very fortunate introduction to our first head of sales, and scaled the first sales team around him. And even though we didn't have the language or the vernacular at the time, this was an SDR to AE, or at least it was pretty full stack in the beginning. It was mostly AEs that would self-prospect, and we would land sort of low-end mid-market type deals. And basically, I started looking at sales as something that was fairly systemic, which I think the head of sales at the time didn't. So I started to think about building out the things around that, basically the fuel rods inside of the reactor that were the sales team, and kind of building out all the things around that to make sure it didn't completely wreck the business as it was trying to grow. And eventually that scaled from nothing to several hundred people in the go-to-market org. That was, I think we got to close to 100 even before we did the exit, and then we sold to, long story short, basically a PE company that we did a roll-up with afterwards and combined a few other teams, and then ultimately took the go-to-market model that we had and rolled that out even in the companies that we integrated. So it ended up seeing it really from soup to nuts, as they like to say, in terms of scaling that out. But this was very, very sales-led. It was sales-led to the extent where we did try to do some PLG, sort of augment that model with some PLG stuff, which turned out to be fairly difficult. It never really got any meaningful traction, and it would often be a topic of discussion that you could argue caused more disturbance than it did additional growth in the setup where you started out being so sales focused and so sales led.
I still remember that, some folks in the city that knew us as a team really well, they were referring to the sales engine we've built as the Mordor of sales, right? so let's just be very clear for
only
everyone
the folks
listening.
that didn't know and understand sales, but yes, there were some folks who did that.
So meaning, kind of, obviously, it was very much a performance culture, very much focused on really hitting your targets, kind of getting, and it worked. We scaled this thing really, really far, and this is kind of the backdrop of you as you said, kind of a product guy, founder, SaaS executive. Basically, that's the world that you've kind of been living in for 10, 12 years or something like this. I want to say kind of roughly that time frame.
Yeah.
And this is what you know well. This has been super successful. And then you were starting to, I want to say, look a little bit for your next endeavor, right? And then pitch came around, which has a very different setup, right? Do they even have salespeople? I don't know what the setup there is, right? And jumping into that, I think that's really the interesting piece that we want to explore here. Really coming from the sales-led culture into this more PLG-led culture. I think that's the interesting bit.
Right. Yeah. So there's a bunch of really interesting sort of findings that I've done sort of so just for context, I've been at Pitch for basically a little over a year. I started just after New Year's in 24. And basically the task, or sort of the journey for Pitch up until then, was very product focused. The team had built a fantastic product and platform. There had been little focus on monetization of that. So it was very focused on getting the product out to the maximum amount of people that you could, but not necessarily focused on ARR growth to the same extent. And that there was a pivotal moment that was decided by the board and leadership to do that, and I was brought on as a part of that. I think definitely also because there was an understanding that as a part of being more revenue focused, you should probably also build out more of a commercial team, perhaps even a classic sales teams and all those type of things. Some of those things were discussed as a part of devising the 24 plan. Mm-hmm. We had a fantastic year in 24 at Pitch. We set out to hit a pretty ambitious target, coming from not really having revenue targets in the past, to be honest, and basically did a ton of things to the financial profile of the company. The company was burning a ton of money in the beginning of the year, and got that to basically cash flow break even and profitability now, with marquee growth, without going into the specifics of the growth numbers. So a great backdrop of success. So how did we do that? Well, I think there was because of the restructuring of the team, one of the things that we needed to do was to figure out how to operate the company with much less burn. This has been obviously a very sort of sign of the times phenomenon throughout 24 and even earlier, and for some people still. And we did spend quite a bit of time figuring out what are the loose ends on these cables in terms of who were holding them before that weren't around, and plugging and rewiring everything was the thing that we did first off. Pitch is an incredible presentation platform, and what we figured out was that we hadn't really done the classic sort of validating work of figuring out what the proper real ICP was. But there's no doubt that if you had a team that came on board Pitch where the commercial folks were using DEX to win business, that was just by every measure, lifetime value, NRR, all those cohorts, the cohorts that fit this ICP were just completely magical and night and day compared to the ones that were outside of that. So that was one of the things that we did early on, was that we decided to anchor on that with the go-to-market and frankly also with the product strategy going forward. So instead of being a broad presentation platform that wants to take on every other presentation platform out there, we sort of early last year decided that was the path we would take. And obviously a bunch of product things then happened along that journey. But more specifically on the go-to-market side, well, first off, we needed to gain control of the sort of commercial stack. So there were some things around installing a CRM and a revenue ops stack that was workable, and having the right analytics platform and those things in place. Where the team had built a bunch of things in the past, but we needed to make some more decisive scaling decisions on what is it we focus on at the stack, and what can we then operate with a more nimble team than what we had before. And one thing that we really needed to make sure that we could do was to reconcile the long tail of PLG, which is the vast majority of all the sources, the motion that we've had historically in Pitch is purely PLG. But what has happened is that some of them, and especially the ICP segment that I mentioned here, which is far more than, even before we started doing it, was far more than half of revenues that were from the ICP customers. All of them were also the ones obviously that had grown in terms of, just expanded by themselves largely. Sometimes they've reached out, sometimes they didn't, but they've grown into attractive ACVs where you can start spending time on it. And you could essentially also spend time on the acquisition side, which we then had not done historically. But the type of ACV you would need, getting into the 12 to 15 to $20K ACVs, we had a good amount of those ICPs ending up there. But what we wanted to do first off, and this is a key thing that I think you need to be able to do if you have a PLG engine and a PLG acquisition model especially, is that we needed to reconcile all the revenue from the long tail and all the smaller customers of $20 a month, all the way up to the 20K ACV deals in a system that would encompass all of them. And historically, and I think this is a very classic thing, you have your self-serve somewhere, and then you've kind of replicated the larger deals into a CRM where the CX folks or whoever, the account managers, then sit and look at that. It becomes pretty cherry-picked. Maybe you have an ACV threshold where those things get into a CRM for somebody to actually work on those accounts and try to expand them and make sure they renew. And we also had a similar model where some of those customer stores, those accounts were being bumped to HubSpot, and then the team was working on them there. And it was pretty clear that while everybody was trying to do a really great job of deciding who needs to go there, it ends up being pretty cherry picked. Even if you choose an ACV threshold, that doesn't take into account the potential, just where the ACV is after its potential expansion. So one of the things we did is we now have a CRM that basically carries both the larger deals and the entire long tail, and enables us to see, even on an ARR graph or a delta on sort of the anatomy of ARR per week, see if there's any sort of anomalies there, drill all the way down into the specifics of those smaller deals, if there's a cohort of smaller deals that either expands or whatever it is, and then in that same system also have the larger deals.
So double clicking a little bit on some of the things you said here. So basically the kernel here is also about really understanding ICP, right?
Yeah.
It's, a lot of people are talking about this all the time, right? But it is very magical kind of once this is fully understood, what you can do about this, right? And then, one of the things you mentioned here in terms of operationalizing around this really then became in the CRM, right? Kind of instead of saying, hey, these guys, look good, let's work on them a HubSpot, or these guys reach the threshold, let's work on them a HubSpot.
Right.
You basically instrumented around that, based on the ICP definition and how, who used it and how they used it. And so that's what I'm guessing, right? Kind of already there, a bunch of value unlocked where now, sales folks can go in, have a conversation with them and then drag those ACVs up, right? Is that correctly understood?
Yes, yeah, it is. And one of the things I didn't mention was that, yes, we do have an ICP tag that goes into the same CRM. So that's the ICP tag that goes all the way from, here's a single seat at $20 a month, all the way up to the larger ones that then are also ICPs, which enables us to do all the classic things, lifecycle stuff, and try to nurture them along a path where you can see that, well, firmographically, there's clearly potential here. So somebody should work on that specific thing manually, even though it would mask itself as a part of the long tail somewhere if you didn't have that enrichment. And we've done some sort of home-baked asking ChatGPT to look at the email domain and go there and say, is it a sales-led company likely? Do they have and then we give it clues. Is there a enterprise plan? Is there a contact sales button? Those types of things.
Yeah.
And it ends up, with surprisingly high accuracy, I would say. Obviously not 100% accurate, but with very, very useful level of accuracy, tags the entire long tail of the CRM, including when we did the first load of this, we obviously ran it through also the larger handheld ones. And that's why we could see that the quality in terms of the accuracy there is really good. So yes, the ICP has been, it's been a revelation for the entire business to not only have a hunch, but then actually go in and say, well, now we had a hunch. Then we tried to mask that hunch with an ACV threshold. Look how wonderful this customer cohort is. But it's not really but you're trying to create a self-fulfilling prophecy by just doing the ACV threshold. So we then ran all of this enrichment, and it really aligns with the fact that if they are a sales-led company of a certain size, and especially in specific industries, so we kind of have this concentric circles for the ICP. So you both have, if they're a sales-led company, that's good. It's very good. And if they're also a sales-led company in this, these firmographic traits, then they're absolutely wonderful, and we should be all over them. And if they're at a certain size, we should probably call them up immediately, or as a part of the self-discovery of the self-onboarding, self-service acquisition channel that we have now. So the ICP definition and the circulation and the sort of cultivation of that internally in the team has done a ton of things for the entire strategy of the business and to align everybody on what are we building and why. It has been incredibly valuable. And I think often ICPs are, it can often be a founder that, boldly, comes in one morning and say, now this is the ICP and
we're going to do enterprise now.
Yes.
Oh no.
I've woken up and now it's upmarket or whatever it might be. Right.
Yeah.
And I think for me in terms of, I realized that we needed to do a lot of work before we just said, hey, this is a huge potential thing. Let's call up some of these guys, which is, I have a lot of muscle memory in seeing how well that works. And, kept that, we are scaling. We call it the CX-led. We have a CX-led model, which is we get past a certain threshold, then we have some very, very good consultative CX folks with a commercial focus that then talks to the customers. And we're scaling that now. I'm very happy that we're scaling it only now, and we didn't get trigger happy doing it earlier before a lot of these things were in place.
So I think it's super interesting that you figured out the ICP. It sounds like it's both through, let's say, quantitative research, but also talking with some of those users and then use external data and AI to figure out, hey, is this an ICP we should work? I think it would be really interesting for the listeners to hear How are you first off acquiring these ICPs? Are you running a freemium, or I think it's a reverse trial? And then what is the process once you've identified one of those ICPs? What's the trigger for you to then start working, I guess this account you can call it, but I think that would be very interesting also to understand, because I'm guessing there's a bit of a sales assisted motion given your background as well.
Yeah, good question. Let me try and explain how it works currently. I think one aspect that you need to understand about Pitch is that it is a company that has, in its history, raised a lot of capital, and it has spent a lot on not only sort of classical acquisition and performance marketing, but also on branding, including, acquiring the pitch.com domain at some point along that journey. And so there is a lot of brand equity that has been built up. So there is a very good amount of organic traffic. So the background radiation of interest towards Pitch and coming to our website and other surface areas are quite strong. And that is and we have, a combination of the classics going on, right? We have some paid, we have some SEO, and we have all of those things. We have a nice long tail of SEO work that's been invested in throughout the years. We have a nice template gallery, a lot of things that bring folks in from those channels. And those as a whole are basically the top of funnel, and it's pretty sizable. And that's where basically all of the acquisition starts. As that then goes throughout the funnel, what we work with it's basically a freemium model where you are able to sign up, and there's a certain free plan in there now that is, I would say, quite generous in terms of the functionality that you're able to experience the product from. Some might say it's too generous even, but
maybe the founder or the
Well, this is a journey, right? And it's something we're obviously looking at. But a good part of all that interest and that brand equity has also obviously been created. It's difficult to attribute how much of that is because of the free plan experience, or the fact that people are able to experience the product without necessarily whipping out the credit card. But it probably factored into sort of the historic sort of surge in traffic that's been built up that we're still enjoying and cultivating and growing further. Mm-hmm. But that is how it starts, and then you go through a funnel with a freemium. You don't necessarily need to take out the credit card, at least in the current incarnation, as you come in, and then the product experience, especially for the ICPs, are so good that they invite their teammates, and then they go on to plans and need to put in the credit for it. So that's how it works. And I have not interjected an SDR discovery call in that, even though you might think that would be muscle memory. That we don't have that. What we do have is, so what's the trigger for us engaging? Well, that is a number of things, and that has changed a little over time. It also comes back to the capacity of the team. What's the most high value task that the team can spend time on? But we obviously do have folks that reach out specifically on expansion as a part of them coming through the product experience, and we obviously triage those to the right folks. We have sort of firmographic triggers. If somebody is a certain size and all that, it lights up on the dashboard. So we have a number of things that sort of triggers a person to work on it in terms of a CX-led motion, as we like to call it. That's in a nutshell basically how we're working this. And now knowing what the ICP is, seeing that being completely validated, both anecdotally, qualitatively, and quantitatively after putting that in place and seeing how things work, we have a bunch of things that we want to do. So we're scaling the GTM team right now to pull some of the levers that is now becoming available to us as we see all of these things sort of happening with the ICP in place.
What I think is really cool is, really, methodological and almost scientifically going after the ICP definition, right? And kind of really figuring this out and then instrumenting around it. And I want to say, in a sales-led organization, ICP tends to end up being the one that the sales guys can sell the easiest to, right? Which just isn't the same thing necessarily as ICP, right? Kind of, especially if you expand definition to upsell and how the chords are behaving, etc., right? So I would say from my perspective, that's one of the difference between a sales-led and a product-led environment.
Right.
But do you have a couple of other examples as well where you kind of stumbled into it's like, oh wow, this is completely different than it used to be?
Yeah, just to piggyback on what you said there, I think the ICP is reset in every pipeline review call.
Yeah.
It's like, why are we talking to these guys? Well, they're they're really interested, and I think I'll close them by Friday, boss. That's kind of how the ICP works in a sales-led organization. At least we get to the sales folks,
Yes.
and for good reason. More power to these folks. That it's not an easy task, and they want to work what they have, obviously. So, but other interesting things that I've come across. I think one somewhat surprising dynamic. I mean, logically, you can kind of obviously predict that this is how this would work, but it was pretty surprising to me how this aspect pans out. So if you have, I just went through, how the acquisition funnel works here, and it's, it's wonderful, right? It's completely self-onboarding. It's look ma, no hands. Just customers just come in and they put in their credit card and they invite their coworkers and they expand to juicy ACVs. And we did try to reach out. They didn't need any help, so we haven't really talked to them. And they are now at this wonderful spot, and they're everything's fantastic. And CAC was basically zero or whatever low number you end up calculating for these types of deals. What's then pretty eerie is that if you had somebody that was completely self-onboarded, without you talking to them, without you necessarily being able to reach them because you didn't have motions in place that would ensure that as they went up, these guys will also completely self-offboard without without necessarily feeling a need to give you any signal of why they're suddenly doing that. And that is, it's not that we have a ton of those cases, but you would have seen one or two where it's eerie that if you did not build a relationship on the way up, you didn't have the first SDR call, you didn't have an AE where there was some camaraderie build up and try to get this through legal and all that good stuff. And you didn't have a CS person that were onboarding these folks. I think along those journeys, you just have so much relationship being built that you will always get a pretty strong signal to some extent in terms of why something is probably not a good fit anymore, or if there's a competitor in play and all that. By going through that type of acquisition model, you will have a strong signal from your customer base in terms of how they're doing, come renewal and through the expansion journey. If you've not built that up, it is eerie how difficult it actually is to get that signal for some of those, even though you would usually, if you reach out, you would usually get a response. Sometimes you don't. If people have been, completely self-sufficient on the way up, they will be self-sufficient on the way down.
I think that's a very interesting insight, actually, and we just recently actually talked about this on a different episode where, yes, there's no friction on the way in, but no one is talking about that there then also isn't any friction on the way out. Yes. Like exactly to your point, basically, and maybe I was a little bit inspired by you in our pre-talk on this, but I almost want to kind of take it to one step further. So you from a sales-led background, now kind of in this area, you guys figured out the ICP, you get it into a nice ACV range where some other ways of connecting to those folks are opening up. You're hiring a little bit into the GTM, pulling those levers. I almost wonder, like, are you thinking about doing outbound? Are you thinking about, starting to do some of those channels? Or do you maybe have a completely different view at this now? Because maybe you think like, hey, outbound is way too expensive, or hey, this doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work in this specific context. Kind of what's your thinking on, and I'm just guessing and what the next levers is you're pulling here, Ulrik, but what's your thinking on what's the next channel you want to build out?
Yeah, I mean, even being very much a guy whose most of backdrop and success have been on the back of outbound, I don't think outbound is it's not on the docket in the near term or even midterm for pitch. And that's for a number of reasons. I think outbound probably has become less effective than through my journey there from 10 to 20 and beyond. I think in recent years, you've just seen these things not be as effective as they usually was, especially, the internal email cadences and all that stuff. I don't believe very much in anymore. I think that's completely, people have become desensitized to those. If you have really good reps that know how to get on a call, I still think that's pretty powerful. But even though I don't think that's in terms of cold outbound or doing acquisition on the outbound side is not on the docket for us. I do believe that, all the classic disciplines of having a commercial acumen and talking to prospects or accounts, in probably more so in our case, is incredibly important. And we're scaling that up. We're scaling up folks that are reaching out to high value accounts or high potential accounts. And we want to get a lot more sophisticated as to the signals and the triaging of what those conversations are and at what cadence they should happen. So that's what we're spending far more time on right now. It's basically having the acquisition model be far more ICP centered, getting more of our ICPs. Finding out the ICP is wonderful. It does a lot of great things to align the business. It's not necessarily incredibly easy to say, well, then let's just 10x those. That is slightly more difficult and takes more time, and it's not just a different bid on a LinkedIn ad or paid search. It's quite a few different tactics that you need to do in parallel that we're all ramping up. But in terms of outbound, no, not the case. I do believe in far more sophisticated AI-enabled lifecycle work that then eventually triggers and triages to an accounts person. I think that's certainly the right for us with the richness of the funnel that we have. It's I guess what you do next has to do with the bottlenecks you have also, right? And for us, it's not really top funnel. It's not necessarily even the ICP volume. It's the sophistication of the engagement model and ramping that up through that we're working through and focusing a lot on.
So one thing I'm curious about is when you were building Falcon, if there was anything related to revenue, it was the go-to-market team, marketing, sales, or CS. That would be the go-to place, not product. Now you're at a PLG company. Is product now the go-to-market? How is that? It must be a key part, obviously, of growing the business. So how do you operate that machinery with the teams?
Right. Yeah. So that's a really good question. I think for a lot of PLG companies, it's the only way you grow or that you get a new sort of growth hike. All of that starts in product, and that's fascinating. I don't think it's entirely right to go all the way there, but it's because most PLG companies have been built by product builders only, and then any GTM or revenue focus often sort of comes in later. I think I've seen that a lot of places at least, and really you need those things to ideally work in unison. But one of the things that we did that is clearly figuring out the ICP and not just doing go-to-market stuff. Let's change let's add a few channels. Let's tweak our messaging on our campaigns. No, actually going all the way back to product. And one of the things we did late last year as sort of a consummation of being completely dedicated to the ICP was the launch of pitch rooms, which is an really interesting extension of the presentation platform that all these commercial teams are using. It's our version of the digital sales room, basically sitting on top of the presentation platform that holds all of the decks and the collateral that you often place inside a sales room or sales hub or whatever these things are called these days. I guess digital sales room is the sort of predominant moniker out there. And you guys will like this. I think that the digital sales room category is a one-trick pony that needs a place to call home. And
wow, took me back. This is like an inside joke just for the listeners to know.
There's a bunch of one-trick ponies categories out there, right? And they will all, eventually need to find a place to call home. I strongly believe that this is one of them. And we did actually consider acquiring a DSR, but didn't really find necessarily a good fit at the time. And we also felt that with our strength in product and engineering, we could do that better ourselves, and we think we did that. So that was really happy about that call. But that was us going back to product and saying, let's build towards the ICP, and we did that because we believe that will enable further growth. And for all of the ICP discussions that we're having, all the interaction, the engagements that we have from the CX-led team, that is now a key component in the rollouts. So we're really excited about that. And what Pitch has become is really, that's the moniker we use. We are the complete pitching platform. So we are not only sales decks for reps. We're all those things that is the surface area that goes into sort of the commercial deals. So it's really interesting to figure out how we want to play in that area. We're probably never going to be the full orchestration system or anything like that. Well, your sales lofts or your gongs and all that. But there's something about the surface area that none of those folks, they use other pieces of collateral and then inject them in there. And we find it really exciting to basically emerge as a player that has a lot of that surface area being built out in a nice way for sales leaders, reps, enablement folks, and designers to really enjoy.
I want to ask a little bit of a question on the thinking around the architecture of the go-to-market. Maybe kind of, it sounds like a little bit high-flying, but there's a bit of a theme that I'm picking up on that is also around just being very efficient, like building a good, solid business here, right? That's part of it.
Right.
We're talking about figuring out what the ICP is, doubling down on that, building additional product for that ICP. We're talking about, actually top funnel is fine. We need to get better at, figuring out whom we should contact, how, when, in the middle of the funnel, right? Instead of spending more dollars trying to generate more pipeline, right? We talked about, we really want to do this addition here on the product side, but instead of buying it somewhere, let's just build it, right? Kind of do it ourselves. My question is actually kind of very much hypothetical. Like if you had 10, 20, $30 million on the bank account, do you think Pitch would go about some of those things differently? Is there kind of an alternate universe where you would take this money and behave differently? Or what's your it's obviously hypothetical, right? And you probably haven't thought about this, but like, what's your thinking here?
We've actually thought quite a bit about that, and without spilling the beans on our actual cash balance, that we do have some cash that we're able to put to work if we wanted to do any of those things. But so far, we have been, I would say, quite determined to do things efficiently. I mean, there is and also the experience of sort of revamping the entire team. Obviously, the actually doing a right sizing compared to where the revenue scale was at, and making sure that we could get to profitability, which was the initial task. That was obviously difficult to initiate and carry out. But as you get to that point, the team is incredibly happy by the way we now operate. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you're a smaller team where people to a much larger extent know what everybody else is doing just makes for a much better sort of employee experience. That's completely clear within Pitch currently. Obviously, you could then go overboard and try to just contain that and not make the growth bets that you should, especially because we have the ability to do some of them. And that's the thing we're actively discussing, that there's this. One of the more risky things you could do is to be risk averse. If you don't make any bets, then somebody else will, and then you're not going to stay as relevant. And that's the thing we're pretty tuned into, I'd say. But would you just then still spend $1 million on something kind of random? That's where we would at least like to have some level of assurance that is the right things. But we now have, I think, a palette of things that with our ICP and the path we're taking, where it's a lot more clear that is this going to make a real difference for our ICP, both existing customers and future, and then it's a lot easier to make those types of bets. But but it's along those lines rather than let's ramp up a sales team or those types of things.
I think that's really cool. And I also think that obviously kind of bunch of learnings from the sales-led to the product-led journey here. But I think what I am picking up, not only from a conversation like this here, but also talking to some other folks, is there's a little bit of a shift in founders, CEOs, and kind of your role as an executive, a board member or a chairman of the board. There's a shift that goes from let's do some stuff to be more efficient for efficiency's sake, kind of tweak the numbers on churn and tweak the numbers on CAC payback and kind of hit those numbers in the right way. A turn towards, hey, folks, should we just try and build a good business here? Like, should we just do that instead and try and kind of make good, solid business decisions? And I'm seeing this trend more and more, and I actually really like it, right? And this is for me not this is the post growth at all cost world. This is almost one step further. Right. It's really the software category growing up a little bit, even in the smaller digits of ARR, growing up a little bit and being like, hey, let's build a good business here. Let's make that the thing that we're striving towards, right? So I really like the kind of some of the takeaways there.
I think what you said there is I see the same. I think and there's a lot of that's incredibly very healthy. There is a flip side, which is that you it's a problem if you end up growing too slowly for a lot of reasons. Well, unless you want, it's you're a small founding team, the cap table is pretty simple, and you just want to build a lifestyle, like the 37 signals thing with dividends on it. That's super cool. But that requires alignment on how the lengthiness of that journey amongst those teams.
Yeah.
And it requires, no external capital raised, by the way. So there's a lot of prerequisites to kind of do that. So if you can't necessarily put yourself in that category, but still want to grow effectively, you're kind of up against the fact that you still need, a bit of speed on the growth. Otherwise, you could find yourself in a place where, at least the optionality, whatever that is for the shareholders, founding team and staff, contracts too much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having the conversation. Thanks for spending time and kind of spilling some of the beans, what's going on in that pitch and also in your head. Thanks everyone else for listening. Hit subscribe if you haven't, and see you next time. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.